Yes, my name is Linda Dwyer. I was born in the Gympie Hospital in 1953 and grew up in my family homes at Imbil. I say family homes because when my father moved the family to Imbil, we lived in an old house in Imbil itself, but he eventually built a new home. And when we moved into that, the old home was demolished and we've got a double garage there. The family home is still owned in the family. And I spent all my younger years in Imbil till I was about 16. And that's when, probably closer to 17, when we left school, all the girls used to get a job at the top mill, as we called it in those days, making packing cases. And I used to quit every Friday, but Mum would ring up the boss and get me back on the books on the Monday, so I never ever got away from that place. And I eventually went to North Queensland, where my father had a timber plant, which was in those days the manager or owner of the plant had to do everything from making the roads, getting the timber out, how would you say it, quoting on how much the timber was worth before that, and then they'd deliver it to the mills. So there would be a team of about half a dozen men from each timber plant, one in the Nebo area and the other one was in the Imbil-Mary Valley area. Dad would have been the first. The Dwyers all over the cousins or my father's cousins, rather than my cousins, all over the valley. Dad was born in a family of, I think it was 4 boys and 2 girls. So Dad was born in 1909 at Belli. Their farm was behind the Belli Hall on the road going down to the old Yamundi Road. And he showed me a lot of history of that place, like the old wagon roads, and that you can still sort of see parts of them. So he was born at Belli and Mum was born at West Croy. And she was one of the first students of the West Croy farm. West Croy School, I should say, sorry. She was also one of the first children born in Croy. So that was their early life. They lived on a dairy farm at West Croy, the house of which is still standing. Mum always wanted one of us kids to buy it, but it never ever turned out that way. But anyway, when Dad was 19 when they married, I think Mum would have been about 17, maybe a bit younger. Their first child was stillborn. So it was post-war baby because Dr. Wilmer, who was a doctor here in Gympie, she says that he was the one person that saved her life because there was sort of medical mishaps involved as well. But anyway, once that baby was born and Dad was well and truly into the timber business by then. He started off at 17 with a bullock wagon and then eventually went to Gymna. And this is where we're getting into the Mary Valley. When they finished up in Gymna, Mum reared the 3 oldest siblings in a bag and tin dirt-floored hut up in Gymna. When my sister and older brother, he was the oldest surviving, were school age, they were sent to boarding school. My sister went to Moreton Bay Girls College and my older brother went to Brisbane Boys College. My younger brother was sent to Brisbane Boys College, but Dad gave him £100 and said, if it doesn't work out, son, you know how to get home, don't you? So that lasted 24 hours. And he arrived home. Anyway, yeah, he was pre-teenage then, and he went straight into the timber industry with Dad. And Dad moved the family down from Gympie to Imbil by bulldozing the road ahead of the old Jeep with the family in the Jeep. And he bulldozed the road through to Imbil. And part of that road is still visible, but no longer used. Some of it's under Lake Barumba. He was responsible for doing the clearing of Lake Barumba. And so I was born to, I don't know how long they were in Imbil before I was born, but I was nearly 3-year-old when they moved into the new house. And Dad went mechanised with the timber then, using bulldozers and trucks rather than the... he didn't go horse, he had the bullock drays beforehand. But did the mechanised ones. He was the first person to use a motorised winch in the timber industry. I don't know where that winch is now. It was on property that we owned, but when the property was sold, the winch was sold to somebody else. Yeah, so I don't know where it is now, but it's still around. Dad was Oliver William Dwyer. The Timberman's Walk at Imbil is named after him. Mum was Marion Winifred Munro. She was of Scots descent. Dad was of Irish descent. Dad's brothers worked with him at times in the timber. Uncle Jack eventually worked for the forestry department at Imbil in the nursery, growing little pine trees, not little babies, but yeah. So yes, there was Dad's brothers were Jack, the second in the line, Eddie, Noel, and I think there was one other, Cecil. And then his sisters were Stella Brooks, who still lives here in Gympie and is very close to her 100 year, and Josephine, who raised her children in Imbil and died some time ago. But Auntie Stella was our last surviving relative. A lot of us... The funny thing is that the next generation have graduated back to Imbil. Cheryl Louise Dwyer is currently living in Imbil. She's got the Golden Apple hair salon, and she's very much involved with Imbil Society out there with organising. She's currently organising the Dinner Under the Stars on the railway precinct out there. Cheryl's a niece. She's my oldest brother's daughter. Yeah. The men in our family aren't the strongest. We've only got, I think, two male descendants left, except for my son, which is sort of indirectly, but 2 Dwyer descendants left of the male Dwyers. Both my brothers are predeceased. If the name is Dwyer, we're related. Sharon's a niece of mine out at Imbil too. She works at the, she's administrative officer at the, I don't know what they call themselves these days, but the top mill there, yes.
Yeah.
So still involved with the timber industry. Sharon Turcoy, her married name. I went to school in Imbil from grade 1 to year 7. I can remember the first day of school. I got dumped there. I didn't know anybody, and I hung onto that post underneath the school till they came and dragged me off. I quite liked school, although it was my father was and his family all had hearing problems. My paternal grandmother was the cause of it, but it was descended from her, but she predeceased. I never ever knew her. And but all Dad's siblings had some sort of a hearing problem, and Dad was profoundly deaf. And it was in grade 1 that they discovered that I was too. So I wanted a hearing aid just like Dad's, which was the old pocket box thing. But anyway, no. So yeah, everything worked out okay. In grade 2, I actually had my own sister for a teacher. And I always tell people that I slept with my grade 2 teacher. Mum and Dad had the 4 children, the one that's stillborn and 3. And then 10 years later, I shockingly arrived. So when my younger sister arrived, the doctor said, "That's it, no more." So there's sort of 2 families with a 10-year break between them. There's 3 years between myself and my younger sister. Yeah. I think it was okay in grade 2, but when she came back, she had time off to have her own family, and when she came back to teaching again, she was teaching grade 4. By which time I think I was in about grade 7, something like that. Yeah, so, yeah, it was okay. I remember when I was in grade 4, grade 4 was in the butter box, what we used to call the butter box at the Imbil Primary School. It was a little one-room set office. Now the tuck shop, I think, or was the tuck shop eventually, but whether it still is or not, I don't know. But that was our grade 4 classroom. And I remember the day, I was horse mad. I was absolutely horse mad. I wrote all over the toilet door, "Dad, I want a pony, P-O-N-E-Y," because I found out there was a little horse called a pony. But I couldn't spell too good in those days. So anyway, they finally got me a pony when I was in grade 4. And I saw her be delivered. So the whole class had to come out and see my horse walking down the road from the showgrounds.
What did you name your pony?
Tammy. And I had her till I was 36. She was in her 40s when I had to put her down. Yes, and our old Jersey cow as well, the old Daisy. Everybody had a Daisy in those days. Daisy had twins a couple of times. Well, that house withstood the 55 flood. I don't know whether anybody else has told you about the 55 flood. Imbil was cut off for almost a fortnight. Nobody had heard, there was no outside communication or anything. We were cut off for 14 days. They ended up getting army ducks in to get us off the showgrounds. That's where we all were. And one morning, the creek was still rising because we were right on the creek. And Mum had gone up to visit Auntie Dulcie, who was Uncle Jack's wife, but she was also Mum's sister. So 2 sisters married 2 brothers. So Mum had gone up to visit Auntie Dulcie and Dad was left to look after me. And he went to sleep. Mum came back and I'm dangling my feet off the back. I'm 2 years old, only 2 years old, dangling my feet off the back veranda in the flood. That house withstood that flood, but when we pulled it down, it didn't have a single nail in it that wasn't rusted through. Yes, so our family would have been Imbilites from the late 1940s, very late 1940s, to the present day. So we aren't the first. There's a lot of other families that are out there that were there long before us, like Stubbenses and Stevenses and Buchanans. Dad did buy a farm towards the end of his life, which was going to be his hobby. I guess only, but he's 63 when he died, which is quite young, really. But the farm was going to be his retirement project, and we had a pedigree Jersey herd, and the bales itself, which are still out there, they're quite a Taj Mahal, the bales. They're a 2-storey double brick building with the men's mess hall attached as a barn from Barumba Dam. The men that built that, and a lot of the men that worked on Barumba Dam were from the Snowy Mountain scheme. They came up from down there and worked on the Snowy Mountain scheme. And a lot of the kids that I went to school with were actually European refugees from World War II. And I remember one of the kids that was in my class, she was brilliant. She wasn't ducks at the school for primary school, but she ducks the higher secondary school. And her parents were working in the mother was a housewife in the dongas that they had for the Maori quarters at Stirling's Crossing. She was a scientist, a medical scientist of some description, a biologist or something like that. And the father was also extremely educated. But what were they doing in Australia? Planting trees in the bush for the forestry plantations. And you've got to think back to those days, and they either worked in the forestry or they worked on Barumba Dam. And a lot of them were up from the Snowy Mountain schemes. Opened up the forestry office there at Imbil. All those trees, the pine trees that are planted in front of it, were planted by dignitaries from England and Europe, princes and dukes, and for the opening of the forest industry in Queensland. I left the valley and came back, yes. After I finally got away from the making boxes at the sawmill, I went to Nebo to work in the Nebo Shire Council office. And I was there until after Dad passed away, and then I went and worked on a cattle station in the Hughenden area as a governess. And after that I came back to Brisbane, but I never came back to Imbil until I was about 24, and that's when I kept part of the family farm. Instead of having a cash inheritance, I kept 35 acres of the family farm and had my GGs on there, and had my two children there. My daughter was born in Brisbane, but my son was born in Gympie Hospital too. But both of whom are still in the area. I always say that they wouldn't leave home, so I did. But yes, after I was divorced, I moved to Brisbane again because that was the only place I could get full-time work. And it wasn't until I was about 12 years ago now that I moved back here to Gympie, sort of on a transfer to the Gympie Hospital, but I was only in the casual pool. I was working in Brisbane in the Royal Brisbane Hospital laboratory in administration, and then moved back to Gympie here, and I was in the casual pool at the Gympie Hospital. So I was there for 5 years, and then I retired completely and moved back out to Imbil, and you'll have to drag me out of that place. It's sort of the same, you know. There's just no work for the younger females anyway. Like even though we've got equal opportunity, but there's still only working in the mills, working in the forestry. Only the tough. And although I can understand all through my life that it was hard work, it's not something you can work in until you're 70 odd years of age. Things change, like you can't stop progress. I do worry about overpopulation at the valley. I really do, because it's a bit like what the big picture is. People come from another place because they like the lifestyle and then want to change it to what they've come from. And I'd rather, I don't want it to stay the same. I'd like the kids to be able to work there till, bring up their families there. It's a great lifestyle. It's a shame to see the dairy industry and the pineapple industry just get decimated like it has been. And but I do like the fact that it's now quite an area for endurance riding of horses.
Yes.
Yes. I was the Janet Gentry, as she is now, and I were the ones that started endurance riding at Imbil. We used the Gympie Active Riders as our backup club, instead of having to start a whole new one. And I always knew that the valley was just the place for endurance riding. And my farm was on Mitchell Creek Road, so I was surrounded by the forestry, and it was quite easy just to slip down the road and into the forestry and go riding there. And there was a few times when I had to say to the horse, "Well, horse, I don't know where we are. You take me home." You'd follow all the bush tracks and found, I think it was Paulownia, a plantation of Paulownia trees. And it was so beautiful because the Paulownia's got that white bark and the big leaves, so the sun was just filtering down into it, and it looked so pretty. But I had to ask the horse to take me home because I couldn't remember how to get home. I've got 2 horses still, but both of them are aged horses and they're not really sound for riding. So I don't tell my kids, but I still throw a leg over a horse if I can find one. My children went to Imbil School, and Evelyn went on to Gympie High. Matthew came home at the end of year 10 and said, "I don't want to go back to school, Mum. I want to get an apprenticeship and leave school." I said, "Well, you get an apprenticeship, you can leave school." He is the only person I've ever known that walked into Centrelink and got an apprenticeship on the same day he walked in. And he did his apprenticeship at Nolan's Meat. Come Easter time, the first Easter he said, "I don't want to do this anymore, Mum." I said, "You're going to do it." He did his apprenticeship and he's still working here in the area in his trade, which is boiler making. And his sister's, she did quite a stint with macadamia nuts, and she and her husband have a property at Lower Wonga, and they do a lot of, Trevor, her husband, was a fly-in, fly-out to Western Australia doing headworks on mines, and last job he had over there before COVID was laying the gas pipeline to Southeast Asia. And that virtually was finished by the time COVID came out, so he's at home now, and they do contract hay baling as well as cattle of their own and hay of their own.
So they're on the land?
They're out on the land. They have 2 sons, and my son Matthew has a daughter who works in the mines up at Teering. But they'll all come back to this area. There is no such thing as workplace health and safety there. You see them winching the logs onto the trucks and just using crowbars to put them in place. And Dad didn't have two fingers on his left hand. I can always remember that. Yeah, like, and when one of the guys got injured, and it did happen, there was also deaths. They'd always bring them, and no radios or anything to get the ambulances out. No real ambulance either. Just a car with a driver, basically. They always put him in my bed.
Oh, really?
It's no wonder I'm traumatised. The timber trucks were, for the Imbil area, were always white, and the timber trucks for the Mackay area, Nebo, were Max. And we had one of the first timberjacks in Australia working at Nebo too. And we also had the crawler tractors, D10s and D12s, mainly D12s. And there's some of the footage there is well, there was no such thing as weight limits either on the trucks. There's footage there of the dozers pulling the trucks out of the bush because they couldn't, because they were so overloaded. We kids used to go down the creek, and I'm about so high, and yeah, we go down the creek, and just to the Imbil side of the main bridge there was where we used to go, where the ones that could swim went swimming. And then there was, up behind our house, there was a shallower pool. Then when we went to school, they had the pools down the creek there where the camping ground is now, where we used to swim there. And that. And I was scared stiff of anything that moved in the creek. And that's why I had a premonition once that the way I was going to die, I was get eaten by a shark, so I don't go in the sea either. But anyway, we used to have to do two widths of the creek to get our advanced swimming certificate. And I swam across the creek, and there was eels sunbaking on the bottom of the creek. So straight back over the other side. That's the way I got my advanced swimming certificate. Well, we used to have the swimming carnival every year. I don't know who exactly put that on, but I got the junior bell of the carnival in 1961, I think it was. I've got the sash and the cup still, but those were the days. Yeah, they used to put a flat top truck for the stage, and there'd be the swimming contest in the creek, and the bell of the carnival and the junior bell of the carnival, and it was community based. Yes. So I don't know who actually put them on in those days, but yeah. In my younger days, I rode at the Imbil show when they put for quite some time they they just had a rodeo and camp draft. Then they put the show events back on, and I used to ride at that. And then when I had my children, I used to work with Jeannie Barry in the ring as a steward. And she was a great person. She was our pony club mother, and and then I also did Gympie show as a steward. I also rode in Gympie show when I was younger too, old Hendy and the ringmaster, and we'd get in there and work. Good. It's good to do it. Living in Brisbane at the Traveston Dam, very vocally up against it down in. Well, anybody that lived here knew it wasn't going to work, and that was it. I look back, or even at the time too, and I thought it was more or less a punishment thing. The government at the time didn't like the fact that we were very pro the other side, and if they could get their fingernails into us, well, they would. So one of the boys I went to school with, and I introduced him to my cousin, and they married. They fell in love, and that was the end of everything. He committed suicide over it. Yeah. So yes, it did severely affect the area. He had been involved in a on-farm tractor accident, and because of the accident, he didn't have full mobility, and they couldn't sell their farm because of the dam supposedly going in. And the funny thing is, you know, just recently, there's something about the lungfish. There's some sort of connection to a cure for Alzheimer's. When I was a teenager, we had a turtle come up out of the creek and lay her eggs in our garden. I never ever saw any hatch out, so I don't think there was. But I found a little penny, what they call a penny turtle, in the middle of the road one day, and I tried to keep it, but he got out, and then he made his way down to the creek. And I rescued one out on the link road, just before the first, before you come onto the first roundabout. It had been clipped by the car in front of me, and when I picked it up, it was only not a full-grown one, but you know, big enough, and he had a crack in his shell, he or her had a crack in his shell underneath, so I brought him into Shannon Street. But they got sick and tired of me in the end because I was bringing birds in. But yeah, as far as I know, he survived, and they took all the details of where I found him, and we used to watch every time the boys, my brothers, came home from the bush. See, they camped in the bush, and probably shouldn't say any of those stories, but yeah.